So if you take a look at number 32, the directions say construct a frequency distribution table. That's the table that we start with. And basically say here the histogram, we're going to do all of our graphs off of this. So our first thing we do is then we notice it has a data set of pungencies in thousands of Scoville units of 24 Tabasco peppers. Pungencies are how hot they are. The number of classes we need to know is 5. That means we're going to need 5 lines on your chart. Your chart is going to go and say classes, we'll have a tally, we'll have a frequency, we're going to count up our tallies, we'll have a midpoint, a relative frequency, a cumulative frequency, and last, class boundaries. Okay, hopefully this gets a little better. Or maybe not. Okay. So get it set up like this. You're going to have 5 lines. For pungencies. Tomorrow you're going to have a little quiz. And you're going to be asked to do the very exact same things we're doing today. Set up your table. You find your class width. We're going to set the table up. You're going to make all 4 graphs from the same data set. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm standing too close to the chalk. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is find a class width. So if you remember how to take a class width, anybody remember how to find the class width? Right?
Find the highest and the lowest.
Good. Find the maximum and the minimum. What do you do with them? You subtract them. And then what? Divide by. What other piece of information do they give right there? Number of classes. The midpoint is where we divide by 2. So find me the maximum entry. The circle there. Check both lines. It's a little bit too better, worse. Okay, so 51 is the maximum. What's the minimum? 32 is the minimum. And we're going to divide by 5. So you're going to divide, and you're going to get 3.8. And what do we do with 3.8? Round up to 4. What if it was 3.2? Where would I round to? Still up. Good. Still to 4. It ensures that we catch that last class. Now, we're going to start your table. Start with your minimum entry right here. Go off my board. Start with your minimum entry. I'll do it one more time. I think it's a sensor in this board somewhere. Because I know nobody's moving that thing on me, and I know I'm not moving this board. A couple years back, they replaced this thing. So I think it's a sensor. So 32 is my smallest. This is where your class width goes. We have a class width of 4. So add up. Keep adding. Go all the way down. 5 classes worth. To make your interval, take 36. What's the number before 36? It says 32. The number before 36 is what? 35. Now, add 4 all the way down. If you think about it, from 32 to 35, 32, 33, 34, 35 has 4 digits in it. That's your class width, 4. But the rule of thumb when you do this and you subtract is that you have to add 1. So to get around that problem, I want you to run your class width down like this. All the way down here is 4 all the way down. Now, tally. Take a couple minutes and tally them for me. So as you read, if you get confused how to tally, read through. The first one is a 35. I put a tick mark here. The second one, 51, tick mark here. Then I get a 44, then a 42, then a 37, 38, 36, 39. Then do the next row. Keep going with those. When you get 4, you can put like a slash through it. That gives you 5. So do your tallies and add up to your frequencies. And what do your frequencies have to add up to? It tells us this stage set consists of tendencies in 24 peppers. So 24. Your frequencies have to add up to 24. If they don't, go back and do it again. Something went wrong. Question? Everything's good? I only did the first round so that you can continue the second and third. Make sure your frequency adds up to 24. So that you make sure you hit every entry. If not, sometimes after this you can just kind of go count the categories. You can count them. Try not to write in your book. How many did you have for the first class, 32 to 35? 3. Second class, 9. Third class, 8. Next, 3 and 1. Good. Okay, so we've got all this done. Now, we're going to find the midpoint. How do I find the midpoint of each class? Of the first class. Brian?
You take the maximum like of the class.
Of the class, good.
And then multiply it and divide by 2.
Okay, so I'm going to add these together. Maybe. Add it here. I'm going to add them together and then divide it by 2. Now, you get a decimal, which you absolutely can get a decimal. So our decimal gives us 33.5. Now, you can gladly do these on all of those, or you can use your class width. Your class width is 4. Add 4 all the way down. Just add your class width all the way down. It makes life a little easier. Everything has to be equally spaced apart, and you found that space apart to be 4. How do I find my relative frequency? Oscar, do you remember? Okay. Christina, do you remember? No? What?
Tally
Mm-hmm.
frequency over like
The total. Good. Relative frequency means it's relative to the whole thing. So when you're comparing something to the whole thing, you put part over whole. So you take your frequency column to the total frequency. 3 over 24. 9 over 24. 8 over 24. 3 over 24. And 1 over 24. Now some of these will terminate in 3 decimals, and some of them you might have to round. Rule of thumb is round to 3 decimals. This should add up to 1. Sometimes what happens is if they're rounding, so you're rounding on all of them, some round up, some round down, they follow your rounding rules. One might be a little bit too close. So you might end up with 0.9999 or 1.001. You might end up a little bit, but you'll be definitely in the ballpark. So just put it in your calculator and get me a decimal. These happen to add all the way up to 1 because most of them terminated except this one, the 0.333 and the 0.042. One rounded up, one rounded down, so we were good. We matched up. How do I find cumulative frequency? How do I calculate cumulative frequency? Elizabeth, you know how we calculate cumulative? What does cumulative mean? To accumulate, to keep adding to, right? So we're going to start with our basic number, our first number, and we're going to keep adding them to the group. So then we add 9 to that. Then we add 8 to that. And we add 3 to our total. It's like a running total. And then the last one. So call this your running total. This is a running total. I'm sorry, but my board is just not cooperating. Okay. Last thing we're going to look at is the class boundary. Because while for most of the graphs we could use midpoint, the ogive we have to use an upper class boundary. We don't get a choice in that one. Because we're accumulating everything to the end of that interval, to the end of the next interval, or class, if you will. So we need that upper class boundary. So rule of thumb for your class boundaries, it's just that you need to fill the gap between those two numbers. So we're going to drop the lowest by 0.5, so 31.5, and we're going to raise the highest by 0.5. So the first class is 31.5 to 35.5. What's nice about this is, and this is why we do it, the next class, when we take 36 and drop it down 0.5, it is where this one ended. So 35.5 to 39.5. Then 39.5, so now that you're going to see there are no gaps in your bars. One we subtract from, one we add to. What it does is it fills that gap. If your bars are, say, from 35, here we're doing 35, 36, 34, 35, here's my number line. This is my axis down here somewhere, so here's my number line. If my bar goes from 32 to 35, and my next bar goes from 36 to 39, I got a gap. Yet we were always told don't put any gaps there. That's because you guys used to do this, 32 to 35, 36, but there was a gap between 35 and 36. So statistically, we have to fill up that gap. If we move this one over zero.5 and this one over zero.5, they will meet there. We don't change any data because we're not calculating any 0.5s in there. Everybody okay with the table set up? Okay. So from here, we're going to make a graph. Complete your table first. Make sure it's all complete. And then we're going to make a graph. So the first graph we're going to make is your frequency histogram. Use your graph paper. If you did the table on the top, put the first one underneath it. You can always get a piece of graph paper later. So this is your frequency histogram. Use your graph paper. Make sure you use the whole graph paper for this. Well, the half that you're using, you're working on. If you folded it in half, make sure you use the space like that, like we did yesterday's graphs. So if you fold your paper in half, make sure that your line comes like this and across. Don't give me this little corner over here or squeeze it into this little. Use the graph. Remember, we need a title. So we're going to say pepper pungencies. That's fine. We can call it pepper pungencies. That's our title. How am I going to label the x-axis, this one down here? God bless you. What do I label that as? What's going to be on my x-axis? Brandon, what's going to be on my x-axis? We could look at yesterday's graphs too. It was on your graph yesterday for your x-axis. So we're going to call this the class of pepper pungencies. Classes of pungencies, I guess. Because they're rated. So basically this is where your classes go. What goes on my y-axis? Frequency. This is my frequency. So let's do frequency first. From 0, the 0 should be in the bottom corner. From 0, what's your highest frequency? 9. So if you want to go from 0 to 10, remember, count the spaces first. If you have 20 spaces, every 2 you can go 1. But if you're a little short, don't just go every 1 because your graph will be halfway. Maybe every 3, make it by 2s so that you're saving a little extra space. So if you go by 2s but every 3 boxes, that might work. Because you really can't go by 1s here. So maybe every 3 boxes, it's not exactly 4, it will be like 2s. Make sure they're spaced evenly apart. For this one and for the first 3, we can use your midpoint. What does your first midpoint start with? 33.5. So therefore, put a break in your graph. And equally spaced apart. Remember that the bar, this is going to be the middle. So start it here. If you have 2 spaces here, you need 2 spaces to the right and then another 2. Because your bar has to go, that has to be the middle of your bar. So what I'm trying to say is this. If here's my graph and I break this and I put a 33.5 here, my bar has to go like this. And then another bar goes like this. So these 2 midpoints could be 2 and 2, 4. So make sure there's another couple here, like 4 here. if you get 2 there, I'm a little happier because you got this here. I'm not as concerned. But remember that the midpoint has to be in the middle of your bar. I know this is a little dry, guys, but hang in there. 37.5. Keep making your spaces and put your midpoints. You have everything labeled, you have everything laid out. Graphically, we look good. Now we're just going to enter your data. Your bars have to be touching. Don't touch the y-axis because you broke the graph there. So my first frequency was 3. So I'm going to start here, make my bar so that the center is, mine's a little off, so I'm, again, they're all off. But do the best you can. The midpoint has to be in the middle of the bar. Then from 3, I go to 9. Then I come back down to 8. Then 3 again. If these two are 3, they should be the same height. And then a 1. Hopefully I'm by the 1. It gives you a good feel where the distribution is. Alright, the peppers, according to this, it's in Scoville units, which has to do with your taste buds. How big is how hot they are. From milder to the real, real hot. So do you find more mild or more hot? Mild, more probably in the middle here. We got a lot going on in the middle here, but the hot ones over here will be few. If it helps, remember you could always make a sideways, fill in this sideways. You don't want to shade them all in. You'll be there a long time shading in because you use a lot of your graph. So just something that makes it pop out off the page a little, because sometimes when you write the pencil, if you're too light, it kind of fits right onto that piece of graph. So this is your frequency histogram. Oh, where this is. Okay. Questions on this? Okay, now you're going to drop down to the next section. You're going to make me the exact same setup as this. Don't fill in your boxes, don't fill in the bars, but fill in this axis and this axis exactly the same. Exactly the same. I want you to repeat the X and the Y axis, the title, frequency, classes. I want everything exactly the same. I don't think I can get rid of this, huh? Hopefully I don't think I can move it either.
Last time.
Do this. Give me a graph.
No, I mean, you do what you did last time. You started dragging them away.
I started dragging them. I can't drag these guys.
Oh.
I must have moved it a little bit. My board is so bad today. It's getting worse and worse. Okay. So did everybody get an XY axis? Now, I'm going to put mine right on top of these, but you're not. You're going to put the dots as if this is your new graph. So now, once you get your axes, you're going to go to your first midpoint, 33.5. You're going to put a dot at the 3. Just a dot. I'm superimposing them on my bar as close as I could get to it. You're going to put a dot at the 9. And you're going to just put dots. they'll be at your midpoint. Then down to the 8. Then the 3. Then the 1. Yours should have these blue dots on it. Did they? Okay. Now, connect those dots with sharp line segments. Not smooth. A line segment going like this. Like this, down, down. Of course, yours will connect a little bit better than mine are connecting. And hopefully they will hit the dot. We have 2 flies that are like dancing around this light. Do you see it? Okay. Now, here's a problem. It does look just like this graph, but because my bar graph is okay where I start and stop, my line graph is not. My lines started, it sits in the middle of your page, right? There's no beginning, no end. So we're going to have to drag those 2 ends down. Take 33.5 and subtract 4. What do you get? 9.5? So come down here to this and say 29.5. It needs a beginning. It needs the midpoint before it. We really technically don't use it, but we need it for our graph. And then the same thing over here. What's 49.5 plus 4? 53.5. So drag this guy down to the next midpoint, 53.5. It has the exact same shape as your frequency histogram, but instead of the bars, we use line segments. Okay, we can keep everything the same, and we just have to make sure we give it a beginning and an end. Otherwise, it's kind of hanging out in our page somewhere. Good? Questions? Okay. Now we do the relative frequency. Again, let's give it a title. It has to have a title. Pepper pungencies. And we're going to give it another axis. Use your paper. Yes, absolutely. I have plenty of graph paper. Right now, some graph paper. I like when you use the whole graph paper. I like you to see it. Some of you like squeeze it onto one little piece and can't see it. There's plenty here. Now, again, start with your classes. This is your classes of pungencies. Because this is your relative frequency histogram, we're going to put the relative frequency on your y-axis. And it's a relative frequency histogram, so it's going to have bars. So again, for this guy, we can use the midpoints. So cut your graph here and space it out just like you did the other ones. 33.5, give me all the midpoints. $49.25. That's my last one. Sorry. Okay, now your y-axis is your relative frequency. Treat it like money. So you have to go from 0 cents, and the highest cents there is 38 cents. So you want to build this from 0 to 40 cents. I want 40 cents to be my last entry.
If you can go by 5 cents, count. If you can skip 2 and go by 5, if you can skip 1 and go by 5, try to use the most of your graph as possible. If you can, like, count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, if that works, then put that in there. Think of it like money because your first one is 5 cents, 0.05, not 0.5. And I'm going to go to 10 cents, and 15 cents, and 20 cents, 25. Mine's really, really low. Holy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't get this whole thing today. I don't know. Every time I go up, I can print here and look how far off it is. So, okay, so somewhere I want this to be. I don't even know. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to compensate as I go, but it's not working very well. If I ask them to look at it, they're going to tell me that I need a new board thing, and it's going to take them like 3 months to order it for it to come in. This is again your classes. Don't forget to give it a title. Pepper pungencies, whatever. And let's see if I can start the skin above being underneath it. This is 0.05, 0.10. Okay. Now, this is going to look exactly like your frequency histogram because it has bars, it has the same shape. All we did was use a proportion over here. That's why instead of using, a lot of people use percentages on the Y. I happen to like the percentages. The book tends to stick with the decimal, but I happen to like the percentages better than this because you get a better feel for where your graph is. And again, you're going to make it look just like the first one. So this is coming to 1.25. Try to stay in the middle of your bar. Then 3.75. 0.333. Where's my 3.75? Way up here. 3.75, sorry. 0.333. 1.25. And a little tiny guy over here. 0.04. Okay. This should be built in 6. It's kind of nice as a percent to watch this because you can say this is like 38% of your data. Then if I add these 12 and 38, these first 2 bars represent 50% of my data here. They're 50%. If you look at it as a percent, sometimes it's a little bit easier. So this is your relative frequency. Same look. Make sure you, again, put relative frequency over here. God bless you. And make sure your first entry is not 0.5. It's 0.05. Think of it like money. Think of it as money. Questions on this one? Good. Now the last one is the different one. This one's a little bit different because this is your ogive graph. This is your cumulative frequency graph. Again, you're still going to use the graph paper. This is your ogive. Give it a title. These are still your classes of pungencies. On your left-hand side now is your cumulative frequency. So, how many entries did we have in this whole thing? What's your total frequency? 24. So we got to go from 0 to 24. So from 0, count your boxes, get to 24. Whether it's 1s, 2s, every 3 could be 2, every 2 could be 3, every, whatever it is you take, every 5, whatever it is it takes you to get there. This is so bad. I can't even get in between here. It's 18. 20. This is 22, and this guy up here is 24. I'm sorry. My board is so uncooperative today. Now here's the thing. The ogives is the only one you can't use the midpoint, and it makes sense because when you accumulate something, you want to go to the end of that. So on the ogives, we use upper class boundaries, but we're going to have to anticipate one problem. We start our first upper class boundary, which is 35.5. So start your upper class boundary. Just take your 35.5 and add 4, or just go to your table and write all your upper class boundaries. An ogive also is a line segment, so no bars here. So keep going to your cumulative frequency. You should always see it going up, or it could stagnate, but it can never go down. So the first one starts at 3. Then the second one is now at 12. Then the third one, 20. Then 23. And then finally 24. Now connect these with line segments. Sharp line segments. Try to connect them better than my board is. And again, we have a little problem with where we start. So you're going to have to pull this down. Just make it come down and drop 4 down. This technically is your first lower one. That's your first lower limit, which is technically the higher limit of the one before it, if it did exist. Don't pull down the end, because this is a cumulative graph. So it shows growth through the whole thing. You don't want to stop it from showing growth.